Hello Cave Dwellers, you may have heard of this. It's the Agon Lite, a little 8-bit computer that's been around for some time. You may have even watched other reviews of it. This particular unit was sent to us about a year ago, and I say it was sent to us here at the mill, the collective, with a view to Heba downstairs, the electronics firm, taking a look at it and helping its creator, Bernardo, also known as the Byte Attic, to work out ways to get it into more hands, to spread the Agon love to more people. And that's exactly what they've done. They've come up with another product with Bernardo's help called the Console8. And I want to take a look at that today. This is what it looks like. And the idea is that it's both an 8-bit games console and an accessible way to get back into basic programming. So you can actually make those games and other programs yourself. It was inspired by an era of machines that unashamedly dropped you right into the action with a ready prompt. Machines like the BBC Micro, which many of us had in schools in the UK, or perhaps the Apple II if you were in the US. My first computer, the Amstrad CPC, or perhaps you had a Commodore 64, the common feature of them being that basic prompt waiting for your input. Of course, we played games on them, but we also all knew that the moment that basic prompt appeared, all of the tools were there at our fingertips to create the next best-selling game. We just needed to know what to type in to make it happen. And so fundamentally, that's what the Agon project and therefore the Console8 wants to deliver. Low-cost 8-bit computing and a feeling of excitement that we used to have back when we were constrained within the limitations of those machines, but we felt that anything was possible. It's not just going to be me telling you the story today about the Console8 and how it came to be. I've roped in as many people as possible. Let's meet some of them.
My name is Bernardo Kastrup, and I got the Agon project started.
So my name's Dean, and I did the Quark operating system and ported BBC Basic to the Agon project.
My name is Curtis Whitley, and on the Agon project, I've been working with enhancing the video output.
My name is Sascha Schneider, and I'm a software engineer.
Hi, my name is Steve, and I've been working on the firmware for the Console8.
My name is Greg. I've been focusing my time on finding ways to make it easier to get game assets into an Agon project.
I'm Richard, and I've worked with Bernardo on the hardware design and the layout of Console8.
We'd like to thank PCBWay.com for supporting our episode today. They aren't just about PCBs, although they do a tremendous job of that. They also offer CNC machining, sheet metal fabrication, 3D printing, and injection molding. If you're creating, then PCBWay.com can help you bring your project to life. Get an instant quote now over at PCBWay.com, and we thank them for their support. A really nice group of people to help us today, so you don't have to take my word for what this is. We've got that wealth of insight and talent to help us today. However, I did have to start them all off with just one question because I was pulled up on it when I spoke about it before. Just how do you pronounce this project?
Agon with an A, so Agon.
Some people have called it Argon. In other words, they put the R in there.
In German, you would say Agon. And in English, I would say Agon.
I pronounce it Agon.
I pronounce it Agon, I think because I just say what I see because I'm from Manchester, so it's. I believe other people pronounce it differently, but I'm sticking with that.
I've never asked Bernardo why it's called Agon, and I always hoped and assumed it was because of the Godzilla Agon lore or history. Anyway, there's an Agon sort of character that's part of a nuclear fallout type of thing, and it's got loads of power. It's really powerful. So I always hoped and imagined it was to do with Agon from Godzilla. Is it?
Agon, like in Greek. Agon is, the Greek god. I mean, it's a bit inaccurate to refer to the entire Greek pantheon as gods, but it's the transcendent entity that represents contest, strive. So we thought we wanted to make a very competitive computer in terms of speed and performance and cost. So we thought Agon is an appropriate name.
Now we've cleared that up, let's take a closer look at the Console8 on the desk. The first thing you'll want me to do, I'm sure, is turn it on. So here it is, all plugged in, ready to go. It's plugged into a VGA CRT monitor, but of course you could use a flat screen if you wanted to. And there it is. The moment I turn it on, we're at a basic prompt, ready to go. And it's running BBC Basic. Patiently sat there, waiting for us to tell it what to do. And of course, what better thing to do than to start with Hello World. So our basic 10 print, 20 go to 10, bang, there's our first program within seconds of turning it on. And while my programming may leave something to be desired, you can at least see just how quickly it gets you into the system and ready to go. And of course, you're not distracted by what's going on in your web browser or anything like that. It's just you and the machine getting stuck into coding. So we will look at more examples of programs running on this, but let's now open up the lid and see what's inside this. Let's take a look at the hardware. So this is the board. It's fairly compact, and the key components, and there's not many of them, so this won't take long, but the key components are a real Z80 CPU. That's an EZ80, so it's not an FPGA, it's not emulated, that's a real Z80 that you can program. That EZ80 has 512K of RAM, yes, a whole half a meg. Imagine having that in your ZX Spectrum or your BBC Micro back in the day. And then the CPU is complemented by an ESP32, which you can think of as its audio and visual coprocessor. Now we'll talk about the capabilities of that in just a moment, but just know that the ESP and the CPU work together to make everything happen, and the ESP has its own 8 megabytes of RAM. And that's everything at the heart of the machine, which is fantastic because it means if you can get your head around these two components, then you fully understand the machine inside out. It's that simple. Now the Console8 also brings some more things to the party. We wanted to make it a bit friendlier to consoleize it, and that's why we've added joystick ports, D9 ports, Atari compatible. There's extra protection to avoid blowing up the board if you short out some of the GPIO pins, and there are quality of life improvements such as a nice case. There's also a stand to stand that up in a kind of a PlayStation 2 style, which I like. And we do a deluxe pack with the keyboard, so you can just plug it in and away you go. That's my high-level overview, but I'm sure you want to hear from the experts to really drill down into some of those technical specifications. So let's hear what they have to say.
Agon is supposed to be a very cheap, very affordable computer, fairly high performance, embodying some of the characteristics of computers of old, like you start it up and you are promptly at a basic prompt. You don't have to wait for Windows to boot, any of that stuff. You don't have to install anything. You turn it on and it's ready for use. There are two main components. One is the EZ80 CPU. The chip that is in Agon is actually a system on a chip. It's not only the CPU. There are all kinds of peripherals, UARTs, SPI, Y2C, all kinds of things built into it. And we chose the EZ80 because it was relatively easy to port firmware for it, because Dean Belfield, who is the firmware lead in the project, already had a Z80 port of BBC Basic.
And we've got a ESP32, which is running at about 240 megahertz, which is doing all of the video, sound, and some of the communication. So it's talking to the keyboard, mouse, doing all of the video, and really taking over the load of the visual display side of things.
So these two cores are the core of the machine. The EZ80 CPU and the ESP32 as audio-video coprocessor. Each one has memory. The EZ80 has 512 kilobytes of parallel memory. The ESP32 has 8 megabytes of serial memory. And then you have all the interfaces. And that's it. That's about it.
So that's the hardware we're working with. Now within that hardware are three key components. We've got MOS, which is the operating system. We've got VDP, which is the visual display processor within the ESP. And we've got BBC Basic, which sits on top of MOS. And because it's BBC Basic, well, we can take books like this, these Osborne books from the 1980s. We can type in BBC code listings and 9 out of 10 times it will just run. Now there are some subtle differences, such as different screen modes. And you're not going to be plugging in a BBC tape deck or disk drive and loading old programs. It's not compatible in that way. It's just BBC Basic. And it is a port of the very same BBC Basic that came from the 1980s. The BBC had a Z80 wedge, looked like a piece of cheese that slotted onto the side of the machine, and a version of Basic was ported over to work with that. So it does have its heritage going all the way back there, and it is compatible with code in all of these old books. but you do still need to think of it as a standalone product. Dean himself was the man behind the firmware, so I think he's best placed to explain it a little bit more to us.
The first bit's the VDP, the visual display processing. It's not my strength really, to be honest, and I'm glad that Steve, who's taken over the Console8 side of things, he's done a fantastic job tidying up the VDP code, because it is not really my cup of tea, C++. I can do it, but I'm dangerous. So he's taken what I've done and he's tidied it up and made it a lot neater, thankfully. And then there's MOS, which runs on the Z80 side, the Z80 side, I should say. That handles everything else. So it runs the basic interpreter, all of the disk I/O or the SD card I/O is done through the Z80 side of things, and most of the GPIO is done through the Z80 side of things. The VDP is only responsible for input and output, so keyboard, graphics and sound. Everything else is handled by the Z80. So the MOS is kind of a basic operating system that handles all of the nasty stuff, and it's got an API so that people that write applications can hook into that, so they don't have to worry about the nasty stuff like getting the file from the SD card. It's just all handled by the MOS. And then there's BBC Basic, which is just more or less a direct port of the one I wrote for the BSX.
It's got a dash of the Sega Master System in terms of the colour spread, so it does 64 colours mathematically spread evenly over the colour wheel. It does audio, which is broadly comparable in some ways to the Amiga, which obviously didn't change its audio system all the way through to the end. So you could basically pick anything from, I would say, the late 80s to early 90s era, and some element of it will have a fellow in that period.
And I should point out that Dean actually comes from the game industry. He used to work for Software Creations, and he wrote such things as the Ghosts and Goblins port for the Amstrad CPC and Sly Spy for the ZX Spectrum. So he's been there and he's done this first time around. However, you probably get a sense from this that this is quite a fluid situation. And because of the soft nature of that coprocessor, it can be improved, it can be developed, and new features can be added. And that's exactly what Steve's doing, who we're also hearing from today. Dean explained that he got it started, and Steve is now improving on it, cleaning up his code and adding more and more features, which I think is fantastic. And that's something anyone can do. It's an open source project. There are Discord servers where the developers are chatting. There's a GitHub. So there's no reason why other people can't get involved in this. That's why it's the perfect time to jump on board with it now, not just to program games, but also to influence the actual development of the system, which is really nice. It does, of course, mean that some of the early adopters of Agon are having to put down development of whatever game or program that they want to write and pick up development of the system to create the functions and features that they need to finish their own programs. And everyone benefits from those improvements. So it's creating a really nice ecosystem. Let's hear from some of those developers now and the challenges they're facing, including Steve, who is really trying to work hard on improving the audio system.
My start was to do basic games. So use BBC Basic to just try to port games I know. But every time I want to start doing a game, I see, okay, this is missing, this could be done better, or and then I go down the rabbit hole and just expand the VDP.
I started writing some sample programs for the emulator. For one, people were having trouble getting a whole bunch of sprites to display on the screen, and then there was a big question about collision detection. And I wrote 2 demos that would not only show 128 sprites, but perform collision detection with all 128 sprites. When I was looking at some of the posts that were going around and the demo programs and things, I read a bunch of posts that said the Agon is limited to 16 colors at certain resolutions, and it'll do 64 colors, but it won't do it in anything more than quarter VGA. And I thought to myself, is that true? And that's where I got started. I started playing with it, and I got it to display color bars of all 64 colors in 800 by 600 resolution. We have a 512K RAM on the EZ80 side, but we can't use it in BASIC. We can only use 64K. And I'm like, no, that's not right. So I wrote extension functions in assembler language that you could connect to from BASIC and use all 512. So obviously, ever since then, Dean's been working on, the 24-bit version, which will use all the RAM. But in the meanwhile, I have a whole set of functions that you can use to read and write variables and arrays in the extended memory. I think that the machine has more technical capabilities, especially I think one of the things that's really up and coming and people have been adding to is the audio. I haven't played with the audio at all yet, but because I've been working so hard on the video. But I think if we can combine the two, we can come up with some really interesting stuff.
So when I started, the sound system did 3 channels of sawtooth waves. And now it can do up to 32 channels of sawtooth waves if you really want that, but they sound a bit naff. Or square waves, sine waves, triangle waves. You can play sound samples if you want. You can apply a volume envelope or a frequency envelope. I was kind of inspired to explore and try and do more. The basic underlying architecture that Dean put in for the video system was to have a video system that kind of worked like a BBC Micro, using the BBC Micro's VDU commands. Greg and I have had a number of interesting conversations, and Greg's very interested in the graphics system. Stuff that will let us do things like Nintendo did, like on Super Mario, where one of the tricks that they have in Super Mario is the cloud graphics are the same as the bush graphics. They're just in a different color. And so we can facilitate that kind of thing with the kind of enhancements that I've been doing.
So I put together a demo about a month and a half, 2 months ago, literally just called RPG Demo, that pulled in a bunch of off-the-shelf, largely public domain assets for music and sprites and bitmap backgrounds, threw them all together and showed how when you combine these things, even someone with zero creative talent when it comes to art and audio like me can put together something which is a really compelling and very late 80s vibe project. At the moment, you're dealing with the Z80 processor on the one hand, which, whilst it's far more powerful than any other Z80 on the market, is still relatively anemic compared to even the most simple computer you can get today. And then you've got the image processor, the VDU, on the other side, which is a modern 32-bit ESP32 microprocessor. And the beauty is trying to find ways of being able to process things like a bitmap or a JPEG on the Z80 side, twiddle around the bits and the visuals, and then send it over in the form that the VDP expects, in exactly the same way that one might have done back in the day if you had the ability to do that with a BBC Micro. Because the Agon and the Console8 are such live projects at the moment and such a lively community, people are constantly having ideas about how to make it better, how to make it more efficient, how to get more out of the constraints that are imposed by the choices made in the system's design. And what that means is we're constantly moving the goalposts in terms of how much more we can do.
That's the wonderful thing about the soft-core processor. Basically, you could re-engineer that whole system just to work better with vectors, better with maths, better with all of those types of things. So it needs someone to focus on that, to make it better, to pick a resolution, to pick a screen mode, to pick how the data is going to be arranged. But it really is down to then someone wanting to do that type of a game system. And for me, that's the magic. There was some limitations on 8-bit computers in the 80s that they could do certain things, and that was it. You had a SID chip over here on the Commodore 64, and you had color clash on the Spectrum. You could simulate color clash if you wanted to. That would be brilliant. There wouldn't be any problem with that now. You could do that as just something nice that you wanted to do. But to be able to have the SID chip over here or the AY sound chip and better vector graphics, different screen modes, really that's just down to how the community wants to develop the software and the firmware that runs on those soft-core processors. Yeah.
So you've met the people, you've met the hardware, you've met the firmware and the challenges faced in getting this far with the development of it. Let's be under no illusion, the more people that are involved in this, the quicker the pace of development will be, the better the results will be, the greater games will come out of it. So the software we're going to see, you could think of it as being a bit like the BBC Welcome cassette that came with the computer when you bought it back in the day, or the Apple II, or the Spectrum, or the Horizons tape. Whatever it was that you got with your 8-bit micro back in the day, gives you a glimpse of some basic and some of the possibilities, and the rest is then up to us, up to you to develop if you want to get involved. Let's take a look at some of the software.
I know this is going to sound silly, but some of the simple things that they've done, I mean, technically simpler, but creatively more complex. Because I've just done demos. I haven't written any actual programs. But some of the things they've done, like one guy did part of a game where I think it was called Pizza Dash, where there was mountains moving in the background and cars moving in the foreground. I just thought that was really cool just by the way it looked.
The system uses a FAT32 formatted SD card for its storage, so you can just plug it into your PC and drag and drop files onto it, nice and easy. And I'm going to load up some basic examples. So remember, we've got the MOS, which is the operating system. On that we have BBC Basic. There is an auto exec file, so when you turn it on, that's when it tells it to load BBC Basic on top of the MOS. So you could, if you wanted, tell it to load something else. But once in BBC Basic, we can use the basic commands, or we can call back to MOS by putting a star before the command to navigate the folders, for example. So star dir, star cd for change directory, etc. And here we are in the examples folder. So something text-based to start us off, we load the basic. If I type list, we can see the code listing, so you can immediately read code examples to help in coming up with your own programs. And then we run it, and this is your classic lander program in which you tell it how much fuel on each turn that you want to burn as your lander plummets towards the moon. It's a nice basic text game which any one of us might have typed out from a magazine back in the day. The next example I've fired up is a higher resolution one. We're in a different mode now, and it's a hat chart. This is it plotting in real time, and then let's speed it up a bit. We haven't got all day. There we go. It's a hat. What did you expect? Speaking of resolutions and screen modes, here's a quick cycle through the current modes available. And that's not to say they won't change in future, but this is where we are today. So we range from mode 0, which is 640 by 480 and 16 colors, through the various modes, 6, 7, here's mode 8, which is 320 by 240 with 64 colors. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see the color palette for each mode down there. And we'll go all the way through, and this is mode 18, 1024 by 768 with 2 colors, so a nice crisp black and white mode at the top end there. How about some more classic basic code examples then? A spinning 3D cube. You know, I'd love to see the Agon appear in some kind of demo party one day, doing its thing in the wild category, or maybe a category of its own, who knows. Anyway, here's the cube. Flickering away. This isn't going to win any demo party titles. But this cube here, this is not flickering, because this is another example which has double buffering. These programs are written in BASIC, but of course there's nothing to stop you from writing in pure assembly, or indeed, because it's BBC Basic, adding lines of assembly code within your BASIC program, which was one of the beautiful features of BBC Basic, inline assembly code in your BASIC. So you can still do that with the Agon. Here are some fireworks as November is approaching. Ooh, this next example might be a little bit fuzzy. It's a work in progress by Curtis, and he sent me a recording of his screen. This is him demonstrating sprites with various levels of transparency. So out of the box, there is not a command at the moment for you to say draw a sprite at X position with 50% transparency. I hope we'll see that soon. Maybe you'll be the person to write that function. Maybe it'll be Steve. Maybe it'll be Greg. Lots of people are edging us ever closer to this kind of functionality. So it's very much a journey of discovery, hacking and tinkering for people who want to help us with that. Novastar, a simple Space Invaders clone. You'll see a lot of programs like this from a lot of people just figuring it all out, as well as things like the expected Mandelbrot generator. I've not seen Conway's Game of Life yet, but surely if it's not already out there, it will be soon. Dragerman, if I'm saying that right, I found this to be really addictive. It's a puzzle game where you rescue miners with limited dynamite and oxygen. You're trying to collect gems for your retirement fund. It's got simple graphics, but they work well, and it's a really devious little game. A little bit unfair at times. I mean, how am I supposed to rescue this guy surrounded by granite? I can't get to him. That's not fair at all. And in a similar style was Realm. This is a work in progress by Nicholas. A little adventure game, you're a knight, it has a very 8-bit approach. Find objects, fight things, take the objects to the right people, and complete the quests and all that business. It could be something straight out of the Magic Knight series, or Dizzy, or any number of games with that lock and key object functionality. Meanwhile, Greg is making progress with his tools in this tech demo, which is using sprites and tiles, and we see animation, and we've got some music in this one, a nice little ditty, which will be familiar to some gamers. Now, something people often ask about projects like the Agon Lite or the Console8 is why? Why did you make it? And I think that's the wrong question to ask. Yes, there are plenty of alternatives out there. You could use a PC, you could use a Pi, you could get a Commander X16, you could get a Mega 65, you could get a Spectrum Next, you could use Unity. There are so many ways to skin a cat. And the question is never why, it's who. Who is it for? And I wanted an answer to that. I have my own ideas, but I thought I'd put it to the others.
Who is it for? Oh, that's a very good question.
Console8, initially it was for me. But me when I was 1986.
Hobbyists, for sure, and students, maybe even at academic level, certainly technical level, but maybe even at academic level, because Agon allows you to easily program everything about it, including the firmware, by writing C code in freely available IDEs with built-in compilers and assemblers. So you can define even the entire functionality of the audio and video coprocessor in C from the Arduino IDE. So it's the idea was to create a sort of an open laboratory for experimentation, to allow everybody to experiment with it.
I think it's quite a hackable system. I think one of my goals was to make it hackable. So not necessarily to write the tightest, most obscure code possible that nobody could possibly understand, but to write something that's reasonably clear that people can have a hack at.
And oh boy, did people do that. There are all kinds of video display processor implementations out there, all kinds of things going on with Agon, even new operating systems, CPM, somebody ported Forth for it. So Agon is a computer that can be whatever you want it to be.
Who's it for? I think it's for a couple of groups. I'm going to say 3 groups. I think it's for those who like the retro computing because they grew up with it, first and foremost. Secondly, I think it's for people because they're now older and they have children or grandchildren. It's for them because they can show it to those younger people and get involved. I personally think, and this is something that's kind of a pet peeve of mine, I don't like the fact that in a lot of programming courses, curriculum now, they don't really teach you how a machine works. You don't learn assembler language. You don't learn about stacks and registers and things like that. So a lot of people programming that in today's level, doing web work and all that, they have no clue what's under the skin. I personally think that if you know how a computer works, you're a better programmer. Or you can be anyway, because you understand what the thing is really doing. But the third group is just the curious people who come across it and say, "Hey, what is this? Let me try it out."
The Console8 is kind of for anyone. It's for someone that wants a computer that they can understand, and that is something that I think's been missing with a lot of modern computer systems. It's the kind of thing that I had when I was growing up. My first computer was an Acorn Electron, and that was small enough and simple enough to get, to understand and to fit into your head. And yeah, that's disappeared. A modern desktop computer is massively complicated. Your phone that's in your pocket is phenomenally complicated, and you can't hope to understand how that system works. Whereas with an Agon, whether it's a Console8 or an Agon Lite, you can understand what it is. That's one of the great things that Bernardo did by building this system. It's simple enough to be understood, and that helps make it a great educational tool.
I think the Console8 is for, I think it's anyone in the retro community, first of all, generally. I don't think it's exclusive in that regard, but as I said, for me, the bit that it really scratches out, the itch it really scratches, is that element of retro which is about constraints and being able to do fun things without access to the cheat codes and walkthrough equivalents which are a modern AMD or Intel system. I love that, I really do.
One of the nicest things about this whole thing is the coming together of a community. Agon as a community existed and was doing perfectly well before the Console8 came along, and the Console8 has simply become a part of that family. And it's attracted people like Greg, like Steve, like Richard, who are now attracted initially by the Console8 and making improvements with a console and video games in mind, feeding those improvements that they've made into the wider project as a whole for everyone, no matter what Agon platform they're on, to enjoy, which I really love. And this all began because of a letter that Bernardo sent and the coming together of Bernardo and Richard. So let's hear that origin story of the Console8.
About a year ago, Bernardo sent us a sample unit, and that sample unit was quite interesting. So we actually gave it to Nick, a hardware engineer, to say, what do you think of this, Nick? And he said, yeah, it works. So I took then more of a commercial view and thought, yeah, okay, this is interesting. I wonder what we could do with it. One of the statements in his letter made me laugh because it said, we're a small team. We're sending this out for review. Please don't send any customers our way. We won't know what to do. So from that, I actually thought, oh, maybe I could help. So I reached out to Bernardo and said, I love this project. I've been diving more and more into it, and I would really love to do some work on it.
And Richard came with this idea of, okay, let's do a high-end console, an educational high-end console. And I say high-end because Richard did not put any constraints on the bill of materials. He basically just said, we should design in the best way we can. We should do all the right things.
Bernardo kindly said, I'll do the design for you. You just tell me how you want it. So after a little bit backwards and forwards of, are you sure? Is that okay? I don't want to take too much of your time. We're happy to take it over. We did sort of go around that loop a few times, but at the end of it, Bernardo said, no, it would be much quicker for me to do it. You just tell me what bits you want on there, how you want it changed, and we'll work together on it. So that was really nice.
It was excellent working with him because he did not constrain me in my views regarding how the thing should be designed. He just gave me freedom. Design it the way you think it should be designed. And only when it came to things that are important to Heber, like what is the aspect ratio of the PCB? How big or how small should it be? What are the interfaces we need? What are our preferred components? Because sometimes, there are 10 components that to me are identical. I could just as well use any one of them, but Heber has a preference for which one is better for them. So that's how the co-design happened. But it was a delight working with Richard. I blundered in the first prototype. I forgot to connect VCC to the ESP32's internal flash.
And I was pretty convinced I must have had something wrong. So I kept going back saying, I keep getting this message and it just keeps timing out, it doesn't work. And Bernardo said, yeah, I've never seen that before.
I put the decoupling capacitors, the bypass capacitors, I put everything. I just didn't connect VCC to it. And of course it didn't work. So we had stress for like 2 or 3 days until I figured out I had forgotten that. But Richard didn't get upset. He just said it's part of the deal. It's the way things go. I was pretty embarrassed. I am the happiest if people make it their own. Then I am the happiest because it's like the kid who leaves home, finds a good job and becomes independent, if you know what I mean. So that's how I feel about it. And I have this feeling already today. Heber took it up. Audimax took it up. It's great. I'm not in control of the roadmaps of these companies, and that's fantastic. I'm just here available to help, but not to put constraints, no.
And so the Console8 was born, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Please do fill up the comments section. Do you love and want to embrace that limited window that you can work within this system and the confines of it? Does it take you back to being a 10-year-old on a BBC Micro again? Or would you rather just have unlimited power and a copy of Unity to do your development on? There's no wrong answers. It goes back to that question of who is this for? And is this for you? Or is this not for you? And if it's not, that's fine. And if it is, I'd love to hear what you would like to do. What's the first thing that you would do when you turn this on? Let me know. We have some closing thoughts from our talking heads in just a moment, and a huge thanks to them for being involved and explaining a lot of things better than I ever could. So thank you for sharing your experiences with this project. Really appreciate it. And the Console 8 is available. Now, the first batch went on sale before this video popped up. I was surprised with how popular it was when I, and also Bernardo, shared it on Twitter and Facebook and all the social platforms. And it may well have sold out. It nearly has, that first batch. But don't worry, we have another 500 due in imminently. You can see the date of arrival for them. If you head over to retrocollective.co.uk, click on shop, and you'll see the Console 8, and there's a standalone Console 8, and there's also a deluxe pack, which includes a joypad. Yeah, we also made a joypad. It's compatible with all D9, Atari compatible joysticks, but we also made a joypad to throw in there, and there's a keyboard that comes with it, so you can get that deluxe pack, all for a really fair price, I think. So go and grab one of those 500, or pre-order one of those 500 if we have in fact sold out. And we will do our very best to meet demand if there is that demand there, and to keep you informed on the channel with all of the great things that you're doing. So let's see what happens. And let's hear those closing thoughts. Thanks for watching, everyone.
People have managed to do transparency levels, smooth scrolling, double buffering, so no flicker at all, very high-level graphics primitives. The CPU doesn't need to bit bang or byte bang anything to video memory. The video memory belongs only to the ESP32. So their ability to do that over what is in principle a limited channel. There is a serial channel between the CPU and the graphics core processor that runs at 1.1 megabits per second, which is a lot for serial. But even within these constraints, people have managed to do so much. That has been the greatest surprise to me.
But I did a little research, and I found out that there's a lot of instructions that I haven't used yet. And for instance, the machine, the chip is physically capable of doing what are called multiply and add instructions, where you both multiply and add in a single instruction. And those instructions are used when you do things like matrix multiplication for 3D graphics. So I think with a little bit of work, maybe putting in Pango, I think it's called Pango, or something like that, a little small 3D C or C++ library, we might be able to get some, reasonable 3D graphics on the thing. I'm just guessing right now based on observation, but it's definitely worth a try.
I think you have to think big. So we should try to get as much as possible from Doom on the Agon. Maybe just Wolfenstein 3D, but something like this should be possible. I don't want to do a word star or something like this. This just makes no fun. You want to do games, you want to do something that makes joy. And then there were these people who say, okay, Agon is not for gaming. When you want to game, just get an ARM SPC and it has a real GPU and such. And I think that's not interesting. If I want to do something like this, I can just grab my PC and do a game on PC. But what we really want to do is bare metal gaming.
The kind of things that I've been working on, I think are kind of icing on the cake. They elevate it, but it's already very capable. I think there's all sorts of different possibilities. We had a mention the other day of someone would like Lemmings on it, and that would be quite good fun. Being able to do something like Elite would be good. And this is all part of my motivation for my work. I want to facilitate this. I want to make these things be possible and not incredibly painful, but to be practical and realistic to try and do that.
I would love to see something fast scrolling, like an open source version of Sonic the Hedgehog, for example, where you get to demonstrate the fact that this can indeed do quick movement. That when you work around the constraints the system imposes, there are ways of achieving pretty much anything you want to achieve visually. It just requires you to stop and slightly rethink the way that you would otherwise do it in a modern era.
I don't know if Bernardo said this, but he did say to me he would quite like to see Elite run on it, and I think I'd quite like that too, to be honest.
I just want it to be used more than anything, you know. So, and if people have got ideas, yeah, could you make this a bit easier for me because it's not working properly? You know, I need it to do something, but I'm struggling and it's complicated. To facilitate that.
From the very basic terms, if you don't want to do nothing else other than code a BBC Basic adventure game, which is one of the things I'm going to be doing on it, that's what you can do. You can do that from switch on, from power on, and you can enjoy yourself attacking dragons and whatever else.